So in today's meeting, Gareth will present how an organization can use the OPUS Researcher Assessment Framework to reform the assessment of researchers at their organization and how we reward open science. Now information about Gareth. Gareth is a principal consultant on open science at Technopolis group, specializing in research careers in open science. He is an ambassador for Plan S under the Coalition S, and is currently developing the Researcher Assessment Framework in the OPUS project. So, Gareth, the stage is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello to everybody, and I appreciate being able to change the talk at the last minute. Apologies for this. Let me just say, I see a few names in the chat. I see several colleagues from the project as well, so I may call on them to say something. I'm looking at Sasha and Panos a bit later, so just be aware of that. Let me first share my screen. Give me one moment. Let's see if this works. Can you see this? I'm just going to ask everybody to take a moment and to fill in this Mentimeter so I can get a quick idea of who you are. So either you go to menti.com, type in 55917680, and you can start filling it in, or use that QR code there in the corner. I just want to know who we have here in the call. So are you a researcher, research manager? Are you research support staff? Are you potentially a policymaker, or are you somebody even more interesting? Let me see, I have at least one. So I will give a few seconds for this. I think we've around 20 odd people in the call, so let's wait until it gets up a little bit more. As expected, mostly researchers, but there are a few others. And those who are typing other, if you don't mind, just throw it in the chat. I'm curious what you are. I'll give it another 15 seconds before I go on. I see 17 people in a Mentimeter, so let's go to 17. One more. Let's see if it comes in. Shall move on. In any case, you can still fill it in. Okay, next question. Can you give me, and nobody ever does what I ask here, but can you give me 3 single words that you associate with researcher assessment? So when you think about researcher assessment, what is it that comes to your mind? 3 individual words, if possible. If not, you can give me 2 3-word combinations. 3 single words. You don't need to do 3. If you can't think of 3, throw 1 at least. So we see what are the main associations. And again, I'll give this maybe half a minute or so. And let this do its work. And while that is going on, did the colleagues who were other, Senia, did they say what they were? I can't see the chat.
No, there is no a project manager.
Project manager, okay, so research manager in essence. Okay, not surprising here. Publications comes up on top. That is exactly what most people are rewarded for. But we also see topics of metrics that comes up quite high. We see related to that the H index again, indicators. And then we see, I guess, what colleagues would like, which is a more transparent system, a system more based on quality or qualitative assessment rather than quantitative assessment. It should be fair, it should have impact, it should be balanced, it should be responsible. We see it linked to supervision and community. It is, of course, linked to career progression. Interestingly, I do not see openness, so I might come back to that one. And last question, and here I'm just looking for one comment from everybody. What are the main issues then for you? We've seen a lot of the words there on that last slide. So what are the main issues for you, or what do you think is the main thing we should change, or the main thing we should do to improve research assessment? Just one short sentence, very short. It's just to get an idea of what is really troubling our colleagues here, or what is it that they think we can do to change this. So put quality over quantity. Okay, I'll come back to that. Okay, a problem of low quality paper mills, I guess, producing a high number of rubbish articles. Reward open science. Okay, I spoke too soon. Value all kinds of activities and outputs, I guess, beyond publications and metrics. We'll come back to that. Base it on quality peer review. Okay, so focused on peer review. Evaluate what we value. Make evaluations reflect the kind of university we want to be. So monitor the assessment and get feedback from it and adjust to it. No impact factor. Make assessment more qualitative, open, holistic evaluation. Get rid of the impact factor. That's going to come back up more, I think. The need to require publications in Q1 top tier journals, most likely international journals. A lack of recognition for diverse practices and outputs beyond publication. Lack of focus on quality. Challenges brought by epistemic diversity. We have policy making inertia. I guess that means that the policymakers go in circles or are stuck or can't really break through and lead to actual change. And I'll see if one more comes in before I jump on. In any case, all of these I will come back to. Last one here. The evaluation committee is not diversified, okay, and evaluates what's best for their own alumni. I may also come back to quality peer review. I'll come back to this in a moment, just to note that I specifically talk about researcher assessment and not a research assessment. Okay, thank you for the honest answers. Let me pull up some slides. I check, can you see the slide deck, or is it showing something else?
The slide, thank you.
Perfect. I'll give this half a minute. There is a QR code in the top right-hand corner. Take a picture of it or screenshot it. Then you have a link to the slides. There's only a few slides, but what's in there is links to some key documents and publications that you might want to read later on. So I suggest you take a copy of this now. I think anyway, Xenia and Mary Lee will send you the slides afterwards, but you can already have them now. I find it easier to read myself. So I will give it a moment for you to take this. Usually I can see people with their phones out. I can't see it here now, so I will give it a moment. And while you're doing that, I'll be very clear. So here we're going to present some of the activities and main results of the OPUS project. And on top of that, we're going to zoom in on what we call researcher assessment. So the assessment of researchers, mostly focused in academia. You could apply this outside of academia to the public or private sector, but I personally think it would be less relevant. You would have to adjust indicators, although some of the indicators would be quite useful. So our focus here really is on assessing the activities of researchers and on more so researchers at research performing organizations, RPOs, or research funding organizations, RFOs. Okay, let's move on. So the OPUS project, this was a 3-year project. It's just coming to an end. We formally ended, but we will get our review in 2 odd weeks, if I'm right. I'm looking at Sasha and Panos. So the deliverables are just waiting for the final reviewer to have a look at them. I'm guessing our very friendly reviewer will have some comments. Once that is accepted by the commission, they will go online. We have the link here anyway to Zenodo, so the moment it's accepted, we'll publish it. Now, this was a CSA, coordination and support action. not a research or research and innovation action under the Commission, although we did do quite a bit of research in it. And the idea was to create coordination and support measures to help universities basically reform research assessment. Open there, I will allow it. Let's see. I can't. Sorry. So the idea here was basically to come with a framework that universities and funders can use and apply to reform research assessment, and especially to incentivize and reward open science. So how can they do this? As I said, it was a 3-year project funded for just under €2 million. The budget there doesn't show the contributions from our UK member, Vitae at the time. England, the UK was still aligning to Horizon Europe. Now, we didn't start from scratch, of course. We worked on a lot of what's already out there. There's been a lot done on research assessment. Research assessment came up originally in the European Charter for Researchers, and the so-called Charter and Code from 2005, which has in the meantime been updated in 2023. But there it talks about assessment. We have, of course, DORA, the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment, pushing for a better way to do research assessment. We had the Leiden Manifesto for Research Metrics on how you should implement assessment and especially the use of metrics. And we had, for instance, at the Commission, the Open Science Policy Platform. One of the specific groups under there looked at assessment indicators. I'll come back to that. We have the Hong Kong principles on research integrity, which also zoom in on assessment. And now we have the Coalition for Advancing Research Assessment, this community of, I think now over 700 plus universities, maybe more. It's probably more. If somebody knows what the current number is, put it in the chat, please. Then what we have is in COARA, you have the assessment, I think it's called the ARA, so the Agreement on Reforming Research Assessment. This is basically a document that states down all the commitments and the actions that the universities who sign it will do. So COARA will implement this. But as you can see, there's a lot of these activities, there's a lot of things going on, but there's not a lot of real change. And that's what we will come to then from this project. Now, when we started, we were looking at principles for assessment. So what is it that we actually want to do in this project? What is it that we are focusing on? We came with a list of 10 principles to guide us. So number one, we wanted to develop a comprehensive set of indicators. Note, I do not use the word metrics. We really talk about indicators here. Indicators can be deployed qualitatively or quantitatively, whereas metrics are typically only deployed quantitatively. So we only talk about indicators in the project, and these indicators are for research performing and research funding organizations. Number two, this framework that we build should apply across countries. It should be able to be used across disciplines and even across, for instance, universities or funders or other types of organizations. So it should be agnostic to the country, the discipline, and the type of organization, meaning that we have to get to a level that's slightly higher, which can then be, flexibly adjusted for each of these different levels or types of organization. Three, as I said, we do not focus on either quantitative or qualitative assessment. In essence, you can deploy the framework quantitatively, you can deploy it qualitatively, you can deploy it on a mix of quantitative and qualitative. It's completely up to the organization. Four, we focus on the assessment of researchers. However, researchers also typically enter into projects as a principal investigator or as a collective team. So we actually also do look at research project level. We don't go higher than that. We're not looking at a much higher organization within the institution, within the university, even at the university level. You could use the framework for this, but in my view, it's not aimed for that, and you would have to adjust the indicators. So our focus is on the researchers and the researchers in projects. Then five, and this comes back to one of the comments that we just seen, we cover the full spectrum of activities conducted by researchers. So we did not want to just focus on publications, of course, or citations from publications. We wanted to understand what are all of the main activities that researchers as a collective do, and then put these down as options that you can select from. I'll come back to that. 6 and 7 are two sides of the same coin. We started out thinking we're going to focus on open science. We changed our mind because we realized not everything can be open, not everything should be open, and assessment covers beyond open science. So on the one hand, we've created a generic framework to assess research activities. It does not focus on open science. We call this the Researcher Assessment Framework, or the RAF, as you will see. And then we have the RAF lensed specifically for open science, kind of a flip of the coin. And this we call the Open Science Career Assessment Matrix, the OSCAM. So essentially, it's two sides of the same framework. One is generic, one is very, very specifically focused on open science. 8, we break down the different indicators into processes, outputs, and outcomes. You don't have to. You can ignore that distinction and just merge it. We did this for the sole purpose of making sure that the assessors realize that researchers can be at a different stage in the research life cycle. They may be beginning an activity at the time of an assessment. So for instance, they might be drafting a publication. They may have come to some form of an output from that process at the time of assessment. So for instance, they may have finished a publication or submitted it to a journal, but of course, no answer. And finally, there may be an outcome. So they may have gone through that whole process and the article itself, for instance, may have been rejected or accepted and published. So we try to distinguish process, output, and outcome just so that the researchers can find themselves in the life cycle that they find on that specific activity. And they can be at different stages, of course, across different activities. 9, we've linguistically formulated these indicators that you will see to guide implementation, but at the same time to be flexible. Now, what that means is they're not so high level that you don't understand what they are, or they're not really helpful. They're set at the level where you understand exactly what we're saying, but you have a lot of flexibility to tinker it or tailor it to your needs, adjust it, break it into sub-indicators if you want, or merge the indicators. Also, a key point here is that when you're trying to look at all the different activities, you end up with a lot of indicators. So I think we have around 100 odd indicators if you look at them generically, and maybe if they're lensed, then another 100 odd specifically for open science. What you don't want is an indicator for every discipline, every possible activity, then you end up with thousands, which is completely not useful. And we also did not want a small list where we tell people you should only focus on this, which we didn't find useful. So we tried to find a balance between too few, and I wouldn't even say too many, but going a bit too far with indicators. And the last one, 10, which I think is the most important, and we might hear from my colleagues in a bit on this, we do not tell or prescribe what should be picked or how it should be implemented. So we leave the selection of indicators, we leave the refinement and adjustment of indicators, and we leave the prioritization of indicators to the research performing and research funding organizations. So we offer essentially a Lego box of bricks which can be used, options which they can use to build their own assessment. I think it's important to note here that most, if not all, of these organizations already have an assessment system in place, which may already have been somewhat revised in the last recent period. The idea here is that they use this framework to decide if they can improve and reform their research assessment and make the lives of researchers better. If they decide yes, then they can look to see what's relevant from our framework, perhaps what fits with their strategic plans or strategic interests or strategic needs, and then they can simply slot that into their own systems. They could, of course, just revise it completely based on our framework and start it fresh, but that's highly unlikely. Typically, it will be an adjustment of an existing system. Okay, before I go on, I'm going to check if there's any burning comments or questions. Oh, 900 already. Thanks, Sasha. Are there any burning comments or questions? If there are, I am happy to answer them before I keep going, rather than wait till the end. If you do have a comment or question, please put your hand up or just put it in the chat, but I will wait a moment before I move on. I don't see anything, so I will keep going. If something does come up, however, please just shout it out. Okay, so 1.5 years into the project, we created a first initial framework. Now, the project was structured like this. First, we would develop a framework that we would consider very draft. We would then take that framework and start testing it putting it to use at our pilot organizations. We had 3 universities, 2 national research funders, and they would essentially look at the framework and select from the framework different activities that they wanted to include in their assessment, and that they would actually pilot and test and give us feedback. So the idea was that we would have a draft, we would open up and test this draft in real life at these organizations, at the pilots, and we would also have a consultation with the community to see what we got right, what we got wrong, maybe what we didn't need, or maybe what we were missing. And then we would come to a final version. I've simply called them version 1 and 2 here. This is what version 1 looked like. I won't go into it too much detail, but this is just to show you that we had a lot of different activities. After the consultation and the many discussions we had with researchers, research managers, policymakers, and all the feedback that we received from our pilot organizations and partners, we came to this final version V2 on what you see here. So this version, the final version of the framework, consists of 4 specific categories of activities that researchers do. We have research activities, we have education activities, we have leadership or management activities, and we have valorization activities. Valorization here meaning how they share information about their work, or how they put their work to use or exploit their work. I'll come back to that. As you can see, each of these then has a specific set of activities. Again, we've not tried to capture all the many different activities they do. We have tried to capture the main activities that most researchers do. So under research, we have drafting research proposals, submitting research proposals for project funding or for projects, whether that's to a university or a funder. We have developing methods or methodologies. Typically, you need to set this up in advance. We have, of course, one of the most important aspects of this, the data, planning the data collection, for instance, drafting a data management plan, collecting the data, managing the data, eventually archiving and long-term preserving the data if possible, making sure that the data is, for instance, accompanied with adequate metadata, even potentially following FAIR principles. We have software, developing software for research to use or enact or analyze research. It's not a huge category, but it is quite relevant for many researchers. We have, of course, publications, but that's just one of many, as you see now. We have physical materials that can be developed. Again, this is across the different disciplines. These materials could be in the humanities. You can think of artworks and sculptures, or it could be in the biomedical field. You can think of specimens, laboratory samples. You can think of even instruments. So materials here is quite a broad concept, but it's the physical outputs that you might create for your research or to support your research. And lastly, we have reviews. Now, of course, most researchers do reviews of publications, but in principle, you can review any of those categories. Many researchers are involved in reviewing project proposals, for instance, checking methodologies, checking data, doing security reviews, for instance, on software, potentially even checking that materials are up to standard. A little bit less common, but it's still a type of review that happens. And in most, if not the vast majority of cases, researchers are absolutely not recognized and certainly not rewarded for doing these reviews, even though they take time and are critical to the scientific process. So I'll come back to the point that was made a bit earlier on quality peer review, absolutely, but it does take time. We are quite focused on publications, and I guess in future we would like to see that expand to these other categories. Okay, education. Here we've got a couple of different activities, as you see. So developing courses, I'm thinking of an entire course now, developing educational material, resources for courses, or just developing resources for colleagues to learn. We have the actual teaching itself, whether it's physical, whether it's online, whether it's to bachelor, master, PhD, or postgraduate, beyond, senior colleagues or students. We have supervision of, for instance, bachelor students, master students, predominantly also PhDs. And we have skills development. So researchers have to learn skills, have to acquire skills. It takes time, and they need to be recognized for this time, and they need to, of course, to be recognized for these skills. Leadership, you can see this as managing different types of staff, for instance. other researchers perhaps in a project, or you could be managing other types of research manager or support staff. We have managing projects, for instance, as a principal investigator, could also be as a project manager if you have some activities there. We have managing different units within your organization. You could think of being a team leader, for instance. You could think of being head of an institute or head of a department, head of a faculty. You could go all the way up to even the head of the university. In Leiden, in university where I used to be, for instance, the rector is always a dean, and the rector himself or herself also typically still continues to do research. So they have multiple roles and activities. Lastly, we have valorization. Here we have more publications for science communication, so getting the word out, whether that's a book, whether that is a article, or whether it's a news blurb or a video. It can be any medium in reality, I guess. We have appearances. We used a bit of a high-level word here because it's quite broad. You could think of being at a scientific conference, giving a talk, whether it's physical or online, but you can also think of any form of way you'd get your word out there. That's not necessarily in published form. We have engagement. Here you can think of engagement with other universities, with other researchers, but even more so with the public or private sector, such as intersectoral mobility or engaging companies in your research or entrepreneurs. We have exploitation, quite an important one. Here, this is about ensuring that your work, for instance, clearly designates the copyright owner, designates the licenses that are in place, for instance, but also you can think even further on how you could set up potential future exploitation of your work. And lastly, we have entrepreneurship. So here we're thinking about spin-offs, startups, and developing new, for instance, research-related products and services. So it's quite a list of activities broken down, as you see, into these four main categories: research, education, leadership, valorization. And the idea behind this is that at any given point in time, a researcher will, of course, not be doing all of this. That's number one. Number two, different types of researchers will probably be doing different types of activities. So, for instance, an early career researcher will probably be busy with data and publications, potentially some forms of teaching and skills development. They will typically not be much doing many activities in the leadership part. They might do some activities of valorization. More senior researchers you would expect to, of course, be doing more research, certainly writing publications, but here you will see them doing more activities in proposals, reviews, developing courses, for instance, supervising colleagues, certainly different levels of leadership and management, and potentially some forms of valorization. So it is not the expectation that all researchers will do the whole shopping list and they have to fill it in. Rather, this is simply an optional framework. Of course, the universities will still decide what they find important or not, but the main point, and this is what we always hear from researchers, is that they can at least find their way in assessment. They can say that they did several activities, they have an idea what they can fill in, and to some extent, they may be recognized and rewarded for this. Now, like I said, it does come down to the universities and the funders. They may decide to select specific activities that are more important, like publications, potentially like data, potentially maybe exploitation, if that's what they're more interested in. They may decide then to prioritize these. They may even decide to rank or weigh how important they are. We leave that discussion to the universities and the funders, and we leave it to the researchers themselves to engage in that discussion and make themselves clear. We do also advise, of course, these organizations to discuss this with their researchers when they're deploying this. Last thing I will say is that this framework that you see is generic. We have a specific framework focused on open science. That's the Open Science Career Assessment Matrix. And that zooms in on the open aspect. But you can also deploy this for teamwork. So for what I've said now, it sounds like it's all the individual and the individual activities, but you can, of course, scale this up to look at groups of researchers rather than the individual. And you can also look at an individual who is engaging with other researchers. So for instance, you could zoom in and say proposals which include other researchers, or you could say publications which are co-authored with other researchers. You could look at resources, courses in teaching that engage multiple researchers. So you can lens this both openly and for teamwork. Okay, before I move on, there's links there. They are to the first versions if you're really curious, although I would advise to wait a little bit and see the new version. But if you already want to go ahead and have a look, we have separated deliverables here. One of them is the Researcher Assessment Framework. In the generic sense, let's say, that's 3.5. The second one is the OSCAM 2, and the last one is the interventions. These links here that you see, by the way, on this slide, they will become active after the review this month, or next month rather. The deliverables on the previous slide are already online in Zenodo if you're really, really curious. We have the RAF and the OSCAM combined, first version, and we have the interventions to support them combined. Okay, I'm only going to give you one example because I want to keep some time for discussion or questions. We're going to first look at the publications, seeing as that's usually the one that always comes up as we've seen in Mentimeter. Here, for instance, if you're just zooming in on publications and you're looking at how you would break this down for process, output, outcome, we would look at publications that are currently being drafted. You'd look at publications that may have been submitted, but you do not know yet what the answer is. And then if you want to start looking at outcomes, you could have the number or the selection of publications that have been published in a peer-reviewed journal, recognized journal. You have potentially the accesses of these publications, so views or downloads or engagements. And then you have, lastly, the usual citations. Now, like I said, this can be deployed qualitatively or quantitatively. Quantitatively will be very simple. Please tell us the number of publications you have in 2025, for instance. You might say, I have 2 that are currently being drafted, or I have 1 that was submitted, or I have 1 that has actually been published. Here's the information. Looking at the publications accessed for those that have been published, you could look at the views and the downloads, the numbers, for instance, or for citations, you just strictly look at the numbers, right? This is the usual way researchers are assessed. You could make this qualitatively. You could ask researchers, please select your top article of all time, so cumulatively, or please select your best article of last year or the last 2 years and explain why. So here, you're not focused on the number of them, rather you're asking them, please tell us the most important article. Note that I did not ask what's the most impactful or what is the most article with the highest impact factor, for instance, or what was the highest citation count. You could, of course, ask this, but if you want to take a more open qualitative view, you can, of course. Now, this is in the generic sense. If we flip this to the open science sense, it becomes a little bit more broader. Typically, what we have when we're talking about open science is either you've done something in an open manner, so you've used open science methodology, or you're actually doing work on open science itself. There are quite a number of researchers not focused on open science, but who do this to push us forward, let's say. So here, if you split them up just for the open science part, then again, when you're looking at the processes, you have only a focus on those publications which are being openly drafted. You could think of, for instance, at a very simple level, in a preprint manner, in a preprint journal, for instance, you can think of the F1000 platform, or it could be even done on Google Drive, I guess, as long as it's openly available for other colleagues to comment on. Or you could have publications that are specifically focused on open science in your field and how that's done. Outputs, difference here is that they've been submitted. So either the publications have been submitted and are already open even before being reviewed, so a preprint, or the publications may have been submitted and are already open and available or worked then on open science. Lastly here, it's exactly the same as the previous slide, just again in a more open manner. The publications may be zooming in on open science and they are available and published or openly available. So it's 2 sides of a coin as we see this. In reality, I think that most organizations will have a selection of generic and open indicators. I do not think they will only go for generic indicators. I do not think they will only go for open indicators. It's just not practical and not realistic. What I do expect is that universities or funders will have a research or assessment framework, what it is they find important, and then they will select, of course, from the different 4 categories, for instance, and potentially name some of these specific indicators and where they think it's relevant, zoom in on open science. Now, this can be done in many ways. We do not go into this, but you can imagine, for instance, that the assessment is actually deployed in a simple manner, as many universities I've been at did, and that was a document that you had to fill in as a researcher. There you get usually a couple of boxes you need to fill in. Please tell us what you did last year in terms of research, in terms of education. And here it's completely up to the organization how they do this. My own view would be that I'd have a separation across these different 4 boxes, and then I would give examples to the researchers of what they can fill in. Please tell us your activities for last year in 2024. You can take into account, for instance, the following categories, and then just give the names, and you leave it to the researchers to fill in. Of course, you try to give them a bit of help or an example to do this. And then same for education, same for leadership, same for valorization. You could, on the other side, set up a graphic user interface or an application or an online portal at the organization where they log in. It's automatically recognizing who they are. Their assessment comes up in front of them. Potentially data is already being collected in the back end through CRIS systems, or for instance, through OpenAlex, or the OpenAir Graph, or Zenodo, or ORCID, you name it. But the data is being collected from these different categories already and automatically being filled into this interface, so that when the researcher comes in, they already have a list of things that they've done that's been collected, and they can just add comments to it or select from it or add to it. I believe, Xenia, you are working on something like this now. I did not catch the name of what this would be. Maybe you want to tell us?
Yes, actually, we are trying to develop a new service to catch all this information called My Research Folio. It's a pilot service right now, so right now in this stage. So yes,
And this is in beta, I understood, right?
in
So it's
beta,
being
yes.
tested.
Yes, to be tested. And what are we trying to do? And we will initialize actually the process now. It's that we want to co-design this service with the community, our community, to give us feedback and review. Of course, yes.
So I think this is a good example of what we really wanted to achieve with our
Yeah.
framework, that it isn't something you take and deploy as it looks, but you simply use it to the best of your ability and you take what's relevant, right? So maybe you can tell us, how did you do it? What did you pick and how did you pick it?
Hmm. What we are trying to do actually is to catch both quantity and quality of the researcher. So to actually go only in the quality section, I think we are not ready there. We are not yet there. So we choose the research, we choose the education. We have some leadership examples, but it's very difficult for us to register and to have this kind of data to visualize that. And valorization. The valorization is the most difficult actually, and the most important one. Actually, and the societal and the economical impact, if I can say this word, the impact of the researcher to the community. So we are trying to pick what we're trying to base this work to the opus, to these 4 pillars actually, and to what kind of data we have, and they are available, open and free available for us. So we have some characteristic and some subcategories of these 4 pillars, if I can say.
Clear. And I'm very curious to see this. So hopefully I'll be able to get a look at this and how you're deploying it already this year. And what's nice is I know that there's some other colleagues, universities and national funders who are also looking at how they can deploy this, but it's exactly the same. They're not looking at using our framework. They're looking at what's in the framework that they can take for their framework, right? Which again is exactly the point, that this
Yes.
can be used.
Yes, because this framework actually, if I can say my opinion here and interrupt you for a second, it can be actually deployed in every discipline and domain. So it will not be different for a medical student, a mechanical engineer, a social scientist. It will be the same for all the domain and disciplines. That is the key here, actually.
And if I take it a step further, it can also be tailored to disciplines. If For instance, it's a university focused on a specific discipline, they could adjust the indicators, which I will come back to in a moment. Okay, if there's no comments or questions, I'm going to move on. Just to remind colleagues, I may have said that incorrectly last time. This slide will give you the first versions, so feel free to click the links and look at them. This slide gives you the actual final versions of the deliverable split up. First one is the Researcher Assessment Framework. Second one is the specific Open Science Career Assessment Framework. Third one is the interventions, which I'm going to talk about now. The links won't work now. They will only work probably within a month at the end of next month after our EC review, but the links will remain the same. They're permalinks on Zenodo. Okay. Now, on top of this, we didn't decide to just give researchers and the organizations the indicators and say best of luck. We tried to give them what we called interventions, so some help in how you can deploy the framework and what you could do across these different categories. Now, and this actually applied to our pilots as well, but of course we adjusted all these interventions after going through the pilot, so we learned from them. So the general interventions that we came with, also a list of 10 here, this is essentially to support the implementation of the assessment framework. Number one, you can collect existing best practices on the reform of research assessment because organizations might want to get up to speed with what's going on and how other colleagues are doing it. I've done a lot of reviews of the university alliances and they've collected so many best practices. It's shocking, but they don't get shared. They're very difficult to find, unfortunately. So a lot of colleagues are reinventing the wheel when a lot of this has already been done and is even out there if you know where to look. Two, ensure that the researchers are aware of the reasons to reform researcher assessment. For science and scientists, researchers are very traditional. And if you want to change anything, they need to understand why you want to change it. And it's a problem I've consistently hit with researchers I talk to about open science. They typically haven't a clue what it is. They see it as just another activity that they're going to have to do, and it's going to waste their time. But if you explain the purpose and the reasons for it, usually they're quite open to experimenting with it. So critically, you need to include your researchers here if you're going to reform anything, or you will get stuck in this policy loophole that we've seen earlier. Three, ensure that your researchers, support staff, and your policymakers are aware of this framework if you're going to deploy it. What is it? How does it look? Why are we doing it? How does it work? Four, you may need to get approval of piloting or adoption of the framework. It sounds simple, it's not. Typically, this will have to go through multiple levels within the organization and multiple sets of agreements in place before it can be piloted. You're playing with a very integral system to the organization. Of course, there's already an existing structure in place. So if you want to try anything, it has to be done usually in a very particular way or in a piloted sense, or if you're going to change it, then it has to be set out and rolled out for multiple years. So it's not that easy to just adopt it and deploy it. It usually involves years of implementation and acceptance. Five, you'll need to set up policies and procedures to implement, monitor, and evaluate the framework. You don't just deploy it, of course. Six, you should include the researchers when implementing it, monitoring it, and evaluating it. So get their feedback on it as they're doing it. We've seen in our pilots that's been very useful. Seven, develop or use tools and platforms to help them. I'll come back to that in a moment. Eight, ensure that the implementation of the RAF does not overburden the researchers. This should not be additional work. If it's taking them a week to fill in, it's gone wrong. So it has to be set up in a way that they can easily fill this in. I would expect it takes some bit of time, it always does, but it should not be excessive or lead to stress or take a lot of time to go and find everything and write it up. It's missing the point if it's done that. 9, you will probably need to revise your organizational policies and procedures based on the implementation. As you're implementing it, you're going to hit problems or have good ideas, and that's going to lead to a feedback cycle. So you will most likely have to revise as you're implementing, and that continues forward. And lastly, 10, make sure to engage the policymakers to define and revise national policies on researcher assessment. Why national? In many cases, academic assessment, public service assessment may be enshrined in national rules, regulations, laws even, meaning that if you want to change something, you simply cannot because you'd be going against the law. So to do this, you will of course need to engage with key policymakers, even politicians, and push for change at that level. So these rules and regulations can be adjusted to help the reform, because very often they can stand in the way. An example here is, for instance, in some countries, it is mandated regulation by law that researchers are assessed on publications in top-tier journals, full stop. You can try to reform what you want, but you cannot go around that law. So the only way to go around is either create a national pilot which allows deviation from the law, or you will simply have to change the law or the regulation. So this is critical. So you see it occurs across multiple levels. Okay, lastly, we had 5 organizations that piloted this. We had Nova University of Lisboa. We had 2 separate departments or faculties or institutes or centers putting it there, the Global Health and Tropical Medicine Research Center and the Information Management Research Center. This was interesting because they deployed it differently. The Information Management Center focused more on data and software, for instance, and there they zoomed in and said the indicators you gave us aren't specific enough. You have something called accesses. No, we will distinguish 5 types of access. So they broke them down into sub-indicators. That's entirely up to them, but that's what they needed. Global health, of course, they looked at other things. Interestingly, they zoomed in on valorization. So as you can see, even within the same organization, they may not agree on the indicators that they use, or they may need to tweak the indicators because of their specific focus and their specific discipline. So that's a nice example there that this happens. We have the University of Cyprus also in the call. This was at the Kiosk Research and Innovation Center of Excellence. We have the University of Rijeka also in the call. This was at the Faculty of Law. And then we had 2 national research funders in Romania and in Lithuania. For some of them, the pilots went in principle for the duration of the project piloting period, 18 months. It's not fully true, because now that they've done it, they're actually continuing on. But critically for us, it was the 18 months. And for the funders, in one case, you see one of them has 60 months, because the funders had to change regulations and deploy it in a funding program. And these programs run for years and need to be evaluated. So in this case, their pilot extends way beyond the project, because they're implementing, for instance, fair data management plans and have mandated them or requested them in project proposals, and will now carry this forward for a couple of years. I have a bit of time. I'm going to put, first of all, Sasha on the spot if he's willing to say something. Sasha, would you mind saying something about the University of Rijeka pilot, why you did it, what you did you find it useful?
Hi, everyone. Yes, definitely. I mean, best way to do these things. And again, we are active in it since the early days of the human resources strategy for researchers, so probably for 15 years, is to be part of such projects. So to have also the means to confront yourself and learn from the other actors to co-create such solutions as the ones that Gareth was showing, and to pilot them. And in this regard, we somehow always tend to involve the early career researchers, because they are more receptive of new things and also more aware of the problems of the current system. And in this particular case, also, we found it very useful. Obviously, it's very good to have also people, librarians or libraries on board when you speak about open science, because they know a lot about that. And we were lucky that the person running the library at the Faculty of Law is very knowledgeable about it. But again, we found also useful to have people from the social sciences and humanities. So indeed, in this case, the Faculty of Law on board, because generally they are, on one hand, even more aware maybe than the researchers from the STEM disciplines about the shortcomings of the current system, but also maybe a little more careful about all the new tendencies. And therefore, again, even more important it was that we had the Faculty of Law on board. So again, our we have tried to spread our pilot actions in the categories that Gareth was showing, so research, especially research, education, and valorization, with very specific interventions in policy. So we changed several of the internal rule books of our universities with dedicated resources. So really within, again, the university library, but for example, we have created a completely new center for science outreach for the activities related to communication and the involvement of the citizens. Repository interventions, so again, quite a few of activities there, a lot concerning training, because again, we found very useful to and very important to really train, especially again, the early career researchers, and awareness raising, again, something that Gareth already stressed, because again, a lot of involvement of the researchers, making them aware again of their shortcomings of the current system and the possibilities that these new initiatives open. It's very crucial. What is also important, such projects are instruments in our view in strategic activities of the university. And again, since we are one of the early signatories of QARA, this was one of the instruments that we used to proceed and to make concrete progress with our QARA action plan. Thank you.
Thanks, Sasha. And Panos, do you mind saying something as well for Cyprus?
Good afternoon from our side here in Cyprus as well. Well, yes, to the extent that I'm aware of, this was the first project that landed at the University of Cyprus, which dealt with open science, and it was directly connected to research and the researchers' assessment. So we, let's say, decided to start by, if I could say, mitigating any risk factors. So we approached the KIOS Research and Innovation Center of Excellence, which is an information technology center of excellence and center. And so they had already started by calling open access. Now they had a policy on open access. Now with the opportunity of OPUS, they made several policy changes internally, and obviously changing the name to Open Science Policy was one of them. So they were, it was like a second nature to their domain. So we started with them. And yes, as Sasha also said, we touched upon all 5 intervention categories: policy, resources, awareness raising, training, and what was again, capacity building, of course. Yes, and repositories and infrastructures. I just wanted to briefly mention an activity that we undertook. Well, initially it started falling under the category of resources, but as it seems, it also affected the awareness raising category as well, which was the training, the introduction and the training of colleagues who were designated as open science. They were called OPUS champions. Now, with the end of OPUS, they are called open science champions. And I am making a reference to this because it seems that this initiative is gaining momentum even after the completion of the project by other departments and other faculties and laws and disciplines. And well, there are mandate, sort of speech, is to act as ambassadors of open science in their environments, in their departments and faculties, advocate about open science to new colleagues, to early career researchers, promote open science, and show a certain level of thought leadership in this respect, and also provide any support and guidance, and well, not only to young colleagues and early career researchers, but also to well-established senior researchers who might have, some skepticism, or might not be well informed enough on open science. So this role of the open science champions will also touch upon in this very important culture shifting priority, which we see that it is also gaining momentum. And yes, finally, also the University of Cyprus as a COARA signatory. This project has also given us the opportunity to be engaged in additional related projects, and enhance and support the continuation of those initiatives, because obviously change takes time. I was the one initially that posted on the Mentimeter about policy making inertia. So we as public universities, we might have all the goodwill to make the changes happen, but since we are abided by well, we are restricted by law. We have also to take consideration the policymakers at the government level, and there is no magic stick to make change happen. So it's a continuous effort. Thank you, Gareth.
Thanks, Panos. I see we're coming to the end of the time. I just see a comment from Ines Almeida that this is at the faculty. You were interested in what they were doing at the Faculty of Law. I see you're at the University of Coimbra, and that you're also curious about doing something there for law. So I suggest you drop Sasha a line, send him an email. He has an email address there in the chat. Also, we have, as Sasha said, I put a link there to the Zenodo for the project. There's already some deliverables from Work Package 4, so look for deliverable 4 point whatever. If they're not all there now, they will be by the end of next month after the review. But there you have the whole process of setting up the action plans, what they would do. You have the whole discussion on what they were doing, and then the mutual learning of how they implemented it, any problems faced, things that went well or less well, and final recommendations. So I suggest you check those deliverables, but probably bother Sasha. He has a wealth of knowledge to help you. So, and I can see smiling, so I'm pretty sure he will. Senia, are there any final questions or comments?
I think if anyone wants to have a question, actually, they can speak now or just type in the chat. I have not a question, but I'm not sure if this is a question. I think the most hard thing in all this process is the policies to assess the RAF.
Do you mean to assess the implementation?
Yes, to assess the implementation. Yes,
right,
I think
so
I saw a number dedicated to this, and I was like, yes, this is the hard part. This is the hard one.
You have to monitor what you're doing, right? That's what we did in the pilots, but that's of course time-based and focused. I mean, looking at Sasha and Panos, they had cohorts of researchers, and they were very actively discussing this with the researchers. What they were deploying in most cases, apart from one of our national funders, there was no consequences, full consequences on the assessment, right? They were set up as pilots. It was set up in a positive manner, and colleagues could engage and try to help and sort and change. So they had a very, I think, active, interested group of researchers. And they were giving feedback all the time. I don't know, Sasha and Panos want to say a bit more about that.
Yes, indeed. But again, also this mutual learning is very, very, very hugely important because again, we learned tons of stuff from Panos and vice versa, I hope, but also from our colleagues in Nova. And it was an excellent thing to have also the funding organization on board. Because again, then you have the incentives in place, so you can also, put the money where your mouth is, which is always useful because, and again, strong leadership support because we really did change several of our internal rule books, including those on the criteria for the advancement in the career. So again, we really embedded this into our processes. But again, as Gareth was saying, in the deliverables, especially of this work package on mutual learning, so work package 4, you can really see all the process and how it grew basically internally and towards the part.
Panos?
I would like to ask Xenia to elaborate further on her thought because I'm not quite sure I understood the point of the policy and how it is linked to RAF, or I didn't quite get it. What I wanted to say, in case I might be able to provide, let's say, an explanation on that, is that the departments, the faculties in our university, and I believe it's the same also in Rijeka, they have a very, very high level of autonomy. So although, as I said, we are bounded by a public law, we are a public university, and actually we are governed by the law of the University of Cyprus. We have a very specific law, voted in parliament and adhered by the Ministry of Councils and, of course, the Minister of Education. The faculties and the departments have a high level of autonomy to put it simply, to test things. And not only in the science domain, but also in this domain of, let's say, administrative aspects. And they have the capability with certain colleagues that we can direct, let's say, the departments can direct the changes or the pilots in this case to implement and test and make their own, let's say, dashboards for metrics, which will guide them in not policy changes, but at least at this point, policy recommendations.
Okay.
Well, if I may add, we had also occasion from our side then be part of the working group of directors conference, which is developing the new national criteria. And also, since we were involved in all this project, the Ministry of Science identify us as relevant, and therefore we influenced also, for example, the national open science policy. So it really is now several of these things are part of the national policies, if you wish, or even rules.
Another development that I would like to share, I have shared this with Sasha, but it would also, I think, be nice for the other colleagues here to learn about this, and Gareth also. We and I consider this that it's a result of the momentum that the OPUS project created. It's the establishment of the Open Science Committee in the university. Well, as Sasha said, even before that, the University of Cyprus was instrumental in drafting the National Open Science Policy for Cyprus. So we have a national policy. But now let's say one of the mandates of this newly formed committee within the university is to sort of, let's say, update and upgrade this policy into something more tangible, because, and I absolutely agree with, as it was mentioned in our first meeting in this committee by the Vice Rector, this policy as it stands now is more like a wish list. So we have to. It shows a commitment. It shows the pathway that we have to follow. But we have to roll up our sleeves and start focusing on the implementation of this policy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So because we are kind of late, so if anyone has a question, you can contact Gareth and Sasa. So thank you all for participating. I shared with you a feedback form in the chat, so about the content of how useful you find the content of the training series. And thank you all for joining. Thank you, Gareth, for initialize this and for the presentation.